Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're joined again by Alex Vezina, the CEO of Prepared Canada, and we've been reviewing a bunch of sort of the common questions and issues that some people that are against some of the lockdown regulations have been raising. Alex, let's go back to sort of, first principles. Some people actually claim the masks don't work. What do you say to that?
Okay, well, I mean, that's, to me at this point, at this stage of the game, that's a bit baffling. But what is their claim? Just point blank, they don't work at all?
Yeah, that they don't work. That the virus is airborne, and because it's airborne, the masks don't work.
Okay, so in general, viruses are stopped by fabric in part, and in order to get, actually, let me backtrack this a bit. So this question, if we're talking about the airborne question, is actually a bit unique. So normally when people say masks don't work, we say, well, COVID is a droplet-borne virus. Doctors and surgeons wear masks all the time. People in countries like China who have to live with smog wear masks. Masks work. Why are you questioning this? But when someone brings up, but the virus is airborne, the mask doesn't work, I need to explain viruses a bit so people kind of understand this. In order to get infected by a virus, one molecule doesn't necessarily just have to get in you. Enough of the virus has to get in you for it to be able to successfully multiply. So this is a concept referred to as viral load. Viral load has come up a lot, but a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to really look into it. So if you wanted to know more about the way viruses spread, please, I implore you and your listeners to look more into viral load, because it explains a lot of this. But basically, you need enough virus in you to get in you for you to be successfully infected. So whenever you're looking at a mitigation strategy to reduce the amount of virus in the environment, what you're trying to do is reduce the amount of potential viral load that can get into somebody. So the amount of virus that's floating around you or that's on a surface or whatever. Now, with previous versions of COVID, before the UK variant specifically, we thought that it mostly would get into you with really heavy droplets, because the virus, there wouldn't be enough of it in the really light stuff that would float in the air, so it would kind of fall and hit the ground. Because we were seeing that the UK variant is 60 to 70% more infectious, at our best estimates right now, it is believed that it is potential that the virus is now airborne. Now, if the virus is airborne, that means that there may be sufficient viral load in the stuff that hovers around you to get in you. So that's where this question comes from. Okay, having said that, you're still getting water droplets or moisture droplets that leave your face and then end up in the environment. The mask is still going to catch some of those regardless of how airborne the virus is. So masks do something. They're less good than previously, and it's not even good, really, the answer. They're less perfect than previously. Ideally, if the virus, would always drop and hit the floor within 6 feet, the masks cover you a lot. But they're still necessary to reduce the risk, because if everyone's not in masks, the viral load in a given environment is so large, your chance of infection is that much greater. Does that mean it's kind of like taking a water gun and then, shooting it at somebody and putting a piece of paper in front of their face, or not putting a piece of paper in front of their face, or using venting gases that are visual, like if anyone works with fertilizers or anhydrous ammonia, it makes a lot more sense, but it's hard to give an easy example for people. But the mask catches some of the droplets, period. So yes, it does something. So no, that is wrong, but there is a serious concern there that the masks may not be enough anymore, which is interesting.
Why aren't they enough? Because the variants are different somehow?
Well, because of what I just said. Because the potential is that with the variant requiring less of a viral load to infect you, the parts that are airborne may now be sufficient to infect you. There were particles of COVID that were airborne before, but there was just so little of it there, and it was so bad at replicating, relatively speaking, that it wasn't in effect airborne. With the virus being 60% more infectious, the particles that are in the air are now enough to infect you, basically, is the problem.
Okay.
It's a nuanced difference, but it's important.
Okay. And so next question, if it's airborne and not droplets that fall to the ground,
Well, it's more likely both now. And this isn't confirmed, but this is suspected.
Okay. If it's airborne, then it's flying all around. How does 6 feet distancing help?
Because the solution to this ends up becoming ventilation systems. So your ability to replace the air and your, frankly, for your ability to suck the air up into ducts or to do something to influence the air around you in combination with what other mitigation measures you have. And if you're beside somebody, you don't have the types of luxury and space to have a large fan or vent take the stuff out of you, out of the environment, and then potentially filter it. So the spacing makes it so your other systems have more margin of error. Now, this becomes fairly complicated, becomes a case-by-case thing depending on how you've engineered the building. But the point is that if you're looking at risk reduction and you're trying to roll out a policy or strategy to your entire population, and some of this kind of stuff gets complex, you can't create different distances for every building. It's too complicated. So you just say 6 feet for everybody, and then you try to have every individual building get a better fan system. This is where the logic goes with airborne viruses. I don't know. Does that make sense? I know it's getting a bit complicated, but it just.
Yep. So I guess what I'm hearing is that you're saying is some of the criticism is a little bit right, but still.
It's right, but it comes to the wrong conclusion.
Right. And
that's the problem.
Conclusion is we should still be wearing masks and we should still be socially distancing and we should add good ventilation or talk outside.
Well, but this also becomes interesting because now it becomes how good can your ventilation be? Because there may be an argument now where you could get such sufficient ventilation indoors, and it's theoretically possible that you would have the same amount of ventilation as if you were outside, and you could potentially reduce the 6 feet distancing, but it becomes an engineering problem. And it becomes a case-by-case basis thing. So this gets very interesting because you end up possibly being able to engineer your way out of COVID through ventilation. As long as you're still wearing masks. It just becomes a question of how good of a fan or a suction system do I have to ensure that I can be at 6 feet or 4 feet or 3 feet? How many seconds does it take for the particle to leave my face and get to yours through a mask and high volume?
So it sounds like what we need is a lot better ventilation and HVAC systems.
Well, and then there's a whole bunch of technologies with this. It's really, really interesting stuff. But this is a very, very complex answer. But it's a positive, right? Because we're looking at potential solutions and the types of things that, frankly, are great. And actually, a lot of the HVAC systems and technologies that are coming out with this, in many cases, have the dual purpose of also having produce spoil less quickly. So in many cases, the systems that are combined with ventilation that work to sterilize the environment are benign to people and actually increase shelf life and reduce pandemic risk. So in some cases, this becomes a win-win-win. And in some cases, they're actually green and reduce energy consumption too. Like it's really interesting stuff. So anyways, there are some interesting solutions here to a unique problem that's now being kind of raised because the pandemic is getting worse. So yeah, interesting.
Okay. One of the other criticisms I've heard about the vaccine is that, pregnant females can't take it, young people, pediatric people can't take it, and people with allergies can't take it. So we're going to cut off so many people already that we're never going to be able to get the, enough people in the population immunized.
Okay, well, I actually believe I've heard you respond to that question before and raise the issues around how clinical trials are done and how we put more vulnerable groups in secondary trials to reduce the chance of problems. So I'm not going to go down something that I know that you already know, but I will speak.
Even if I know something, I still ask you, Alex.
No, but the reality is that you've worked with pharmaceutical companies. I've worked with pharmaceutical companies. You know the way it works, and when possible, you start with your initial control group to be as low risk as possible, because when you have something that's new and experimental, you don't want to kill people. So the secondary trials end up being more and more vulnerable people as you better and better refine and make sure things are safe. That's why we don't initially start testing things on humans first, right? So, but that's one piece that you've already answered in general. Yes, we're going to not test pregnant people in the initial control group because we don't want to accidentally kill somebody who has a vulnerable immune system, when we can have healthier people try it first to try to make sure that there's more margin of error, right? This is the way all drugs are done. It's safer, it's more humane, it's just better. But there's that piece. The other piece, which I think is way more critical that people realize, every vaccine that's protein-based has the potential for an allergic reaction. This is common. This is incredibly common. Allergists work with their patients on finding out if they can take any vaccines. When you have young infants and babies getting, and 2-year-olds getting their MMR vaccine for measles, mumps, rubella, we look at whether or not they're valid for it, whether they have to be disqualified if there's a complication. And we're at 95% herd immunity levels with MMR. So this has been a problem that has been around since vaccines have been around, and we've already addressed it. Number one. Number two. There are currently existing vaccines that we are attempting to, there are problems with the distribute in Canada that address the protein problem. So I've talked with allergists and worked with allergists specifically on this issue, and there are specific vaccines they tell their patients not to take because of this problem, but they have other vaccines they can recommend to their patients if they have an allergy concern. So we've already fixed this problem.
Alex, lots of people have criticized a lot of the things that are going on. And what you've done, I think, really well today is you've gone through them and you've, said there's a little bit of truth with a bunch of them, but not enough truth to change our current strategy. And I guess my question is, what should we do?
Okay, so there's two answers to this. Ideally, go back in time, but we can't do that. So the perfect world, we should be changing our strategy because the strategy we picked is a bad one. I've talked about this at length, how there are 3 overarching strategies that we can pick. And the third option, which is the one we chose, has the greatest risk for problems and how it basically didn't account for contingencies and failure. However, once you're this far in to a strategy and you've paid this level of price, as we discussed before, course correcting and turning around, in most cases, it has a greater cost than staying the course. You can't turn around and open everything up with the number of people who've lost loved ones and with us already paying the price to get the vaccine to the point where it's at. Our political will would be completely eroded. You could maybe go Australia and lock things up severely, but Ontario just announced it's done a reopening plan. If we took a full 180 and went to Australia the week after, it would be complete anarchy. So we're staying the course because that's what we've decided to do. So what should we do? It depends on who you're talking about. So if you're talking about the individual person, depends on what industry they're in. Some people, frankly, should be doing what's best for them because they don't really have an alternative. And I don't want to be advising that because it's not great for everybody else, but some people need to live to next month. There are people who are being left behind by the government and don't have money and need to do whatever it takes to survive. But that's been true before the pandemic with other issues. And it's the unique cases of the vulnerable. So unfortunately, Brian, the answer is it depends, because it depends on the scope of what you're asking me about, what level we're talking about, and then at the level who we're talking about, to be honest.
Okay, so I guess what you're saying is if you could go back in time, what you would have recommended is been more stringent, like Australia or some of the Asian countries, and counted that by being more stringent, the lockdown would have been shorter. Is that correct?
No, I'm saying we should have picked either A, Australia. There's 3 options kind of, because there's Australia version or Japan version. Canada probably should have gone Japan version because we're not an island. So Australia becomes tricky with the border with the States. So actually trying to do a cultural shift with getting everyone in masks and doing it early. There was a problem with supply, which we've talked about before, but that's option 1. Or option 2, we should have actually gone Sweden. But that is a very, very serious choice to make. And actually, I want to correct you on one thing because I've heard you talk about it a few times. Sweden is not a herd immunity strategy. Sweden is a assume the loss strategy. It is completely different. Sweden didn't pick what it picked because it wanted to reach herd immunity quickly. It picked what it picked because it assumed the damages of the non-COVID losses would be greater. So they assumed the dead. It is a very serious decision. It's not a hope herd immunity strategy.
We're going to choose the economy over life.
Yes, but that was the decision. Their public health agency said they expected the effects of the response would cause greater death and hardship than COVID. It was not a herd immunity strategy at all.
Which is what some of the critics have said, is that
it is.
that the mental health, that the economic health, that other things are worse than just the public health.
The problem is you have to pick that at the start because we've already paid the cost now. So if we were to now go into that, we will have paid all of this economic cost for basically nothing. There would be anarchy in effect.
But
Can you imagine the rage from people if we did that?
You're seeing it, some of it in the United States, where some of the
not really. I mean, come on. Biden just came in office. You see the stuff coming in. First 100 days, everyone's in a mask. And what some of the
you see the Super Bowl, there were tons and tons of people not wearing masks out in parties all along the streets in the stadium.
And that's the States. And there's still over 50% of their population that wants to be in masks.
So, but you're having some states that are very lax in masks and distancing and closures, and others that are more stringent. And so you're seeing the difference in the different states.
You are, but that's still not Sweden. I don't like the American model. We spoke about this at length. I don't like the American version because what you've done is you've taken basically the worst of both worlds and you've let the people just be mad about it and disobey.
Okay, so in Canada,
right,
what you're saying is we could have gone Sweden, but we didn't. We could have gone Australia or Japan, but we didn't.
Exactly.
We did this half measure, and because of the cost on so many businesses, and economics, and the closures, and the lockdowns, and pitches to people to mask, to social distance, to stay at home, etc. We just got to muddle through and keep at it.
Well, yeah, and unfortunately, this strategy assumes the risks of both of the other strategies, whereas the other strategies only assume the risk of one, right? So you have to plan for the contingency of failing on the pandemic side and failing on the response side at the same time. This type of strategy has a huge chance for failure, and we basically haven't planned for it, which has been spoken to at length by me and by other people like me. So, but we've made the choice. We are here now. We're here.
Alex Vezina,
we're doing it.
Canada. Thanks for joining us. We'll check back in when we hear about whether some of these variants go crazy, and we have another issue to deal with.
I gave you good news this time. There was positive stuff about ventilation systems. Okay.
Thank you, Alex Vezina. Everyone, let's go out. And actually, I did have someone come and say, change your filters. And I did change my filters on my my HVAC. Alex Vezina, CEO of Prepared Canada. Thanks for joining us.
Have a good one.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us. Good night, everybody.